Hello, my name is Tiffany Riston, and I am presenting my research from private placement due diligence, term sheet, and regulations. So, for any business opportunity, due diligence should be required. Due diligence means steps are taken to satisfy a legal requirement. It is a general duty. Due diligence investigates the past, present, and future of any given business opportunity. Investigations should include looking into revenues, costs, expenses, talent, and many other factors before entering a business opportunity. Due diligence is often not required, but it is necessary. Due diligence is conducted to find confirmation of profit, any deal killers, and verification that the opportunity meets potential partner requirements. Many people are required to complete a due diligence. These people include investors, corporate staff, attorneys, accountants, investment bankers, loan officers, and many other professionals. Investors may hire outside third-party consultants as well. Due diligence starts at the initial transaction offer and continues until a binding contract is signed. Potential parties involved in the business opportunity usually have a checklist of information that is needed. Internal management of the company prepares financial statements, business plans, and other required documents. Outside research is to be conducted from external sources. While researching, I read from a Bloomberg business article preparing for financial due diligence. There's a checklist for any given business opportunity. Um, the article explains that the investor needs to find what the business opportunity needs financing wise and the proposed terms. An investor should question why the company deserves their investment and what are their goals and where exactly the money will be going. The checklist continues and many different topics are covered, including compensation and stock options. Due diligence is a reminder that an investor needs all aspects of the business opportunity before making any decision. From research, too much due diligence can be done and a decision will not be made with too much information. As an investor continues contributing to more and more business opportunities, they will learn what information helps them make the best decision for themselves. So, a private placement memorandum is often referred to as an offerings memorandum. According to the basic definition I found on Investopedia, a private placement memorandum is a legal document stating the objectives, risk, and terms of investment involved with private placement. Within the document, financial statements, management biographies, and a detailed description of the business and other terms are required. From the offering company's viewpoint, having a private placement memorandum shows investors that the company will comply with SEC rules. The offering company also receives some protection by having the memorandum, similar to insurance. The Securities Act of 1933 requires all companies to regulate their offers and sales through the SEC. Although this is required by the SEC, there is an exemption with use of Regulation D. Regulation D allows entrepreneurs to obtain equity financing between $1 million and $5 million, with unlimited amounts all having slightly different restrictions. There are different rules with Regulation D, including Rules 501 through 508. Rule 504 covers small corporate offering registration, which states these businesses can raise no more than $1 million during any 12-month period through the sale of stock. Rule 505 allows a small company to sell up to $5 million in stock during a 12-month time period. They can sell the stock to an unlimited number of investors, but 35 of them have to be non-accredited. And how an investor is accredited is they have sufficient assets and meet those requirements. A Ppm does overlap with a business plan and includes a term sheet. From additional outside research, I learned that the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act was effective July 2010. The act included the consolidation of regulatory agencies, increased risk assessment, increased regulation, tools for financial crises, increased standards of international and credit ratings for agencies. The act was proposed by the Obama administration in response to the 2008 financial crisis. The act is to prevent the activities that led up to the crisis. The additional research, no charges have been made against any banks executives that participated in credit default swaps, fraud, and money laundering from that time. From the Act, different effects have been made within the private investing sector. As part of the Act, the Securities and Exchange Commission accepted rules to implement that Private Fund Investment Advisors Registration Act of 2010. The Private Placement Memorandum allows equity financing to happen with ease. The Advisors Registration Act, many private fund advisors are now required to register with the SEC. With that, the SEC will now be subject to examination and reporting requirements, specifically advisors managing assets of $100 million or more. A few exemptions might still be available. An advisor's assets under management will also be required to be calculated using one method only. Additional managers will be required to include capital commitments to a private fund. The SEC allowed a 2-year period of transition for advisors that were previously exempt. A non-U.S. advisor is still exempt from most regulations, although they are not allowed to advise a client from a U.S. business that is a U.S. citizen. There are additional regulations now required by the SEC for private sector advisors. So although this act passed, there has been pushback from the act. From the article I read in the New York Times, Kicking Dodd-Frank in the Teeth, the Republicans have introduced a bill to cut back on 3 major components. The bill would allow banks to hold onto risky securities until 2019, 2 years longer than what is currently allowed. The bill would also change derivatives and allow them to possibly become more risky. In regards to private equity, the bill would allow exemptions for some firms filing as brokerage firms. So, a quote from this New York Times article says, such regulation is required of firms that receive fees for investment banking activities, like providing merger advice or selling debt securities. Broker-dealer regulation would increase SEC examinations. Others believe that the regulation would decrease costly conflicts from this type of private equity. Even with the back and forth political disagreements, the private sector is still growing, and the private placement memorandums are especially important with additional regulations since 2010. A private placement offering is when a small or growing company issues shares to raise capital. These particular offerings do not need to be registered with the SEC. The criteria for a company to receive commercial loan or venture capitalist investment is tightening, though, therefore leaving PPO as the best capital alternative. The private placement offering can reduce transactional and outgoing costs with the exemption it receives by not having to follow the many federal and state regulations. The offering is considered a smaller number of investors because the nature of the deal is more complex and confidential. Additionally, a PPO allows quick penetration into capital markets compared to a process of public offering of securities registered. A PPO is not suitable for every company, and one must understand the federal and state security laws to determine that. Prior to 1992, there are many restrictions regarding private placement. Since many regulations have been lifted to allow small businesses to raise capital with some ease, businesses are now allowed to promote their private placements on a larger scale to a larger number of buyers. It is very important for small business owners to understand the regulations still in place. It is suggested to assemble a legal and accounting team prior to using private placement. Specific regulations I previously talked about with Regulation D. There are advantages and disadvantages for private placement of securities over a traditional IPO. As stated above, the private placements are less expensive and time-consuming because they do not require the use of brokers or underwriters. Private placements can be the only source of capital for risky ventures or startup companies. Private placements may also allow the business owner to pick up their investors who have similar interests and goals, which would be very beneficial to the entrepreneur. The investor might be entrepreneurs themselves, which would also allow the business to receive valuable assistance to the company's management. Private placement allows business to remain private until an IPO. There are, of course, a few disadvantages included in private placement. One disadvantage is that suitable investors may be difficult to find or have limited funds if they are interested in investing. Private placement securities are sold with a deep discount, possibly forcing the business to relinquish more equity. This is due to investors wanting a larger composition for taking on the larger risk. Although PPOs bring ease for many small business, there is still risk associated. Because of the exemptions, a major risk for potential investors is ensuring the business has disclosed all information honestly and accurately. With private placement offerings, the return is projected high, which is caused from the potentially high risk. Investors may be forced to hold the investment indefinitely because the securities offered are generally illiquid. The liquidity is from the limited opportunities to resell. Private offerings are sold through many tactics, including cold calls or free lunch seminars. The seminars often use a high-pressured sales approach with artificial time limits to increase the decision efforts. Although these tactics are used today, historically PPOs were sold through communication and trusted relationships. A venture capitalist explains their terms of a proposed investment through a document called a term sheet. This allows venture capitalists to have protective clauses that reduce the valuation for the entrepreneur. It is important for a skilled attorney to negotiate a term sheet. The process of an entrepreneur receiving an investment offer could be long. Once the entrepreneur receives a term sheet, it shows a venture capitalist is interested after hearing their pitch. The term sheet is considered a conditional offer. The VC will perform further due diligence. The process after the entrepreneur receives an offer can be lengthy because of the precautions taken by the VC. The key terms included in a term sheet include preferred stock, liquidation preferences, dividends, reverse vesting, and drag-along rights. A VC wants preferred stock because it allows liquidation preferences and voting rights. This gives venture capitalists protection and control. The liquidation preferences include if an acquisition happens, bankruptcy, the sale of a company's assets. The VC wants money first out of any deal. The drag-along rights means that minority shareholders have to agree to a sale or liquidation of the particular company. In this situation, the founders would get nothing because the company did not live up to its projections, which is harsh but very true. Overall, due diligence is extremely important for any potential investor, especially because exemptions given to private placement memorandums and offerings. Risks are associated with each of these because they relaxed regulations. Although risks are high, returns can be even greater. Both the entrepreneur and VC must protect themselves, and this is discussed after the initial offering. A term sheet ensures how a party will each be protected and rewarded. This is a very detailed process, and regulations are always changing, but these types of investments provide a large profit to the economy and to the business. Thank you for watching.